Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to go over the psychology of a child who grew up too fast. And from that perspective, we're going to look at the definition of it based on research and then traits of an individual who might fit this criteria based on research so that you guys can know where you stand from this particular point. Basically, the short way of saying it is a child who assumed adult-like responsibilities and identities within their childhood. Now, the research of this definition was in 2009, and what it basically is mentioned is childhood and adolescent hardship, feeling unsafe, exposure to violence, actually, fewer economic resources as well. Some of them would be a non-two-parent family structure. This was associated with individuals that actually reported feeling older than their peers, or they considered themselves adults while still in their early years, teenager, for example. And so they already had let go of their childhood. Now, this isn't always going to be the case with individuals who struggle feeling unsafe or exposed to violence or whatever that may be. However, it can be very common, and this can affect how you interact with your peers, right? Because if you feel a little bit isolated or alienated or older than your peers, this can affect how you're perceived. And sometimes what also happens is the parent themselves might actually put that responsibility onto you. I'm going to put a disclaimer, but if you don't want to hear it, I would say skip 1 or 2 minutes ahead. I do want to point out that this is not something that I can relate to. To be honest, in my early years, even I was very independent, and I think that independence, I was kind of like able to do whatever I wanted to do, which kind of made me actually during my early years more immature. To be honest, I felt that way, and I think I was perceived more immature because I was just not, I didn't listen to a lot of people. And so I do not relate to this. I was probably the opposite. I grew probably too slow emotionally for whatever reasons. You know, we have our own experiences, but mine's probably fit more of that. Although I might not come across that way at this point. Definitely that was a characteristic or correlation in my life. Of course, that's changed. I've learned from it, but it's something I wanted to keep in mind. In case I'm missing something or there's bias, just let me know. That might be part of it, okay? So the very first trait that may occur if you feel that you're an individual who grew up a little too fast, you actually might have the early assumption. No, that's not the right word. Responsibility. I don't really know how to describe it, of adult roles, okay? You might work early. You might be doing household tasks. You might be doing caregiving, okay? This is that same study, the 2009 study, showed that pathways from childhood hardship to adult subjective age was partly responsible or based on the fact that these individuals also had to assume adult roles that are more extreme. So they could even be living away from their parents. They could have work. They could have parenthood. So maybe they had a child early and they end up taking those adult responsibilities very early on. And that can actually affect a lot of people because what ends up happening is not only do you not fit in with your peers, you also very likely feel different because of this characteristic, and that affects your self-esteem. You can further isolate yourself for this reason, okay? That's very important. The next one is this one is really sad, to be honest. They all are, but this one is just, I just don't even know what to say. You actually have a higher risk of physical health issues. And that's really unfortunate, okay? Childhood adversity is a link to early onset of age-related physical problems. So elevated BMI was one that was cited in the research. This is 2018. More physical problems, high cholesterol, and more back problems, bone issues. And it's because you're probably assuming those adult responsibilities early on. And unfortunately, that can create some sort of, you might physically feel accelerated aging because of that. So if you, let's say, you became a parent at, let's say, age, 16, you had to go out and work. Maybe you had to clean up after the kids. So you're already physically engaging in things that maybe other 16-year-olds are just not doing. And so you have already put pressure on your body. And unfortunately, that is a correlation based on 2018 research that you might feel that way. So the best way to put it is if you feel like maybe you have some physical issues that none of your peers are really relating to, it's probably because unfortunately the trauma that you experienced put you in situations that harmed your body. I don't, it's just, that's a hard one, right? I'm sorry for anyone who experienced this. The next one is that you actually remember that you were put into situations to which you were told to take high responsibility at your age, and you were reprimanded to some extent to not do that. The research in 2009, which is a very interesting research, if you guys are interested, please look at it if you have access. The child actually felt unsafe in certain neighborhoods or situations to which they actually felt they had no choice to assume these responsibilities, or they felt unsafe with how their caregiver took care of them, so they took on that responsibility, or they felt like they had to take on these responsibilities, otherwise they may have consequences. And so if you relate to this, you guys might understand this situation more. And so if you're comfortable, you're welcome to share that in the comments, only if you're comfortable, because this, it's a heavy topic, I imagine, right? It's a lot of trauma. But I think it can help folks to understand that they're not alone, because a lot of you guys who have experienced this, you probably feel very alone. And you're not, but it's easy for me to say. So I just want you guys to know that. The next one is very interesting. I think a lot of people know this. And again, this is unfortunate, very unfortunate. Research was done in 2024. If you have struggle with emotional regulation, it may be because you assumed adult-like responsibilities and you were not able to process those things prior, because you put away whatever processing skills you had or could have learned in order to focus on other aspects in your life. There are stages in our life, right? In our how we developmental stages, and you guys can look into that. Maybe I'll make a video on that at some point. In psychology, it's fundamental. But during these stages in our life, we are, from a psychological perspective, we're going to learn parts of our identity and learn to heal and grow so that we can become as secure and as healthy as possible. What happens is individuals, when they have adversity or trauma or something that doesn't allow them to understand or learn what they need to learn in that stage, they end up picking up a lot of maladaptive traits to strategize around their survival, considering they weren't able to pick up those traits. And so an example could be that a child may have learned to maybe their parents were fighting all the time, and so they had to learn to take care of their siblings at an early age. So they learned about responsibilities and things like that. They weren't worried about thinking, I feel so sad that my parents are fighting, or I'm scared of my mom or dad. They didn't have time to think about that because they were busy taking care of the other kids. And so what ends up happening is this child, when they grow up, they have a lot of dysregulation or a lot of anger or a lot of uncomfort with understanding these dynamics because they had to put it away as a child. That's just the best way I can put it right now. That research you can still look at. But basically what ends up happening is you actually, because of this, you get a lot of low social support, because when you're open and vulnerable to people, that allows you connect to your peers. However, you might not have the same connections and things that are occurring in your life as your peers. And so you might feel isolated because no one can relate to you, okay? This is interesting as well. Really interesting. I don't even know if this is a good or bad thing, but it is true based on research. This research was done in 2020. This is a tough one for me as well. I'm not sure, because I feel like it shouldn't happen, but it did, and it could be a good thing. I don't know. So basically, we actually see that you have accelerated brain development due to some of these risk factors in your childhood. And you might have noticed, you might remember when you were younger, do you remember, sometimes it could be even puberty was early. You might have remembered that your memory was better than a lot of the other kids. You might have noticed that your focus was more on other things that more adults remember or care about when you were a kid, if you remember that, it might be why. That doesn't mean you're permanently like stuck this way, right? Because eventually we all develop at this, and we all are around the same time. You just were a little earlier. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing, but it just means that you were under I don't know, you were under so much trauma that your body literally rushed your brain development, which I do think is a very unfortunate situation, but I don't want to discourage you. It happened, and you're very strong if this was a case, and I do appreciate everything you've been through. It's a tough topic, y'all. The next one is you might have a lower sense of purpose in your life as an adult, okay? This research was done in the United States, I believe, but there was also other countries as well. I'm in the United States, so I tend to prefer that, but it doesn't matter. It just helps me to understand it better because it's the same culture that I grew up in. So basically, adults who we saw that did assume adult responsibilities early in their life, they actually also reported now as an adult that they tend to have not as much purpose in their life, and they keep searching for purpose, because what happens is adulthood is where you find your purpose based on some of those responsibilities. You're doing a lot of these responsibilities and you're focusing on that instead of some of that emptiness. You already picked up these traits when you were young. And when you're younger, you tend to find more of your purpose in terms of your identity and your emotions and how you feel and your friendships and things like that. But you didn't have that time. And so now as an adult, you're missing that and you feel empty. That research was done in 2018. The next one is that you actually might be more neurotic, you might be lower in agreeableness, and you actually might have higher anger and aggression. This is more common if there was a lot of DV, domestic issues within the household, to which you had to assume adult responsibilities due to that. However, the research did suggest in general that any individual who experience these types of issues, they do actually realize that they are less agreeable, or they're more worry forward, and they actually struggle with aggression. They don't know where it comes from. And like we had mentioned a couple points prior, you didn't really have time to process your feelings. And so now they're all just bottled up and stuck with you. And so if this is the case, I think it's important to actually first know that this is what happened so that you can have awareness and start letting that go. I will make a follow-up video at some point. I don't know when, I'm busy, but how to kind of heal from this. But I just wanted to make an intro to this idea because it's heavy, and I know that, to give you guys some direction, okay? The research is in the description. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.